So Startup Stories, if you're just joining us, is a conversation between two entrepreneurs. It also, as you can see, we're fielding some questions from the crowd. Our next two guests, we've got a local, I guess pretty much local startup person here with Ingrid, who's been in the community for a while. She's a founder of Quick Left, which you probably heard of if you're in the startup scene here, and she's helped numerous startups launch their applications. And Promise is a new addition to the Boulder community, formerly the CRO of Resumator and now the CEO of TapInfluence. So give these two a warm welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Being a Boulder native, I'm really excited to kind of, in a way, be able to introduce a new member to the Boulder community here. So another round of applause for Promise for moving here.
Thank you, guys.
So, people may not be familiar with Resumator and kind of your history. Do you want to give a brief introduction?
So I love to say I grew up in Silicon Valley. I started my career there in the early 2000s, and if someone calls me middle-aged, I'll punch you in the face. I'm fabulous and in my 30s. So in terms of, I came to the Valley in the early 2000s, and I joined a skyrocketing company called BEA Systems, which was one of Oracle's largest acquisitions. And then from there, I realized I loved product marketing, and I loved being in a tech company, and I wanted to do that going forward. So I left BEA in early 2002, 2003, and started my own company during the worst dot-bomb revolution. And it was a services company. And over the course of 5 or 6 years, we pivoted from being a services company to being what was called ASP, or Software as a Service. And so I got my first experience as a SaaS CEO. We grew that to over $12 million in revenue and sold it in 2008. And then I started a company after that called Upmo, which was a technology play around helping people figure out their career paths. So raised a bunch of money there, had a not so great exit, but a lot of experience and learning. And then decided that, part of what makes you, I believe, a good CEO is the ability to sell and to market and to be kind of on the leading edge of how your customers find you. So I took a role at the Resumator as the company's chief revenue officer and chief operating officer. So I owned essentially the entire customer life cycle. When I was there, my charter was to raise a bunch of money, so I did that. And then grew the company from 1,500 customers to over 3,000. And that was a software as a service company serving small businesses.
That's really interesting. I also started my services business during the downturn. And I don't know what it is about downturns, but it seems like a good time to start.
All the masochists come out.
So, one of the things I've been thinking about as I've been kind of growing my company and watching the community grow here is, once you've kind of done something and you've been really successful and you're on to your next company, what are some of those things that go through your head about, maybe the pressures about reproducing your success, or, how do you kind of think through the next company?
Well, that's a good question. So I don't really focus on success per se. I focus on what are the outcomes. I think the thing that keeps me up at night, and if I look at any experience that I've had that's been unsuccessful, I can tie it back to one thing. It wasn't amount of capital I've raised. It wasn't the technology. I guess it was two things. It's two things. It's the market. So you can be in a commodity market, which is where we were in the Resumator, and from a strategic standpoint, you can make no mistakes. Your product, your sales, your marketing have to all be completely dialed in because your competition has pretty much the same thing as you, right? But in a growing market that's on the front end of that technology adoption lifecycle, you can be a lot more nimble, you can be creative, you can also dominate and monopolize your category. And so if I look at where we are at TapInfluence, we're building and we're creating a new category. And so we can be a lot more innovative and we can try different things and we can establish where we are. We're not being defined, if you will, by the market. So that's a big part of it, is getting into a space where you're in a market that's growing at a significant pace, and hopefully you're on the front end of it, not the back end. And the second is, and I might get emotional, I'm just kidding, is you gotta love your team. If I look at, my experiences where it wasn't the biggest success either within a successful company or a company. It's when the team relationships weren't as tight. And so, if I look now, like, who am I today and what kind of leader do I want to be? I find that I lead best when I love the people who work with me. And not like, but love. I care about their career success. I forgive them for when they screw up. They forgive me and give me the benefit of the doubt. So I think the two things that I look for whenever I'm building or growing or moving into a role is, what market are we in and how big is that market and is it vibrant? And then secondly, can I love these people and can they love me back? And so those are the two things I've learned.
It's interesting that you kind of bring up the market. I always thought that while business books are really inspirational, they're sort of weird because there's really no formula to having a successful business, and there's always so many different variables. What are some of the now that there's sort of been a couple of economy downturns, what are some of the patterns that you've kind of seen now that we're seeing a stronger economy again? Anything that might be interesting for other people here just about to get started?
Wow, that's a good question. You should be able to raise money in any market. So, I don't know if people are seeking venture backing here, but when I started my company Upmo, it was in 2008, and 2009. I just come off a huge win. I sold my company. I got over the depression that comes from success, which everyone in this room will experience. Selling your company is actually a very interesting and emotional experience. But it was a pretty bad economy. And at the time, if you look at how venture goes, raising your Series A in 2001, I don't know if you guys have ever seen that show, Silicon Valley, which I hate. It kind of talks about and alludes to the fact that, like, in 2001, when I started my career, it was like you could walk in and say, I have a business plan, and some guy would write you a check for $5 million, and you would go off into the sunset and go public. At least that was their perception. But in 2009, it was the opposite. It was like, how many customers do you have? What's your recurring revenue? And that was table stakes to, like, enter a venture conversation. And so we decided, look, we want to raise money. And so we raised $5 million, all from private investors, all from angels. And so when I did the math, when I got my second gray hair, I was like, why do I have these gray hairs? And I realized we pitched 462 angels to raise $5 million. And so, that ability to be successful in any kind of economy, I think is huge because, in some markets they're frothier, like now it's frothy, you can get great valuations and that's awesome. But in 3 years, it might not be that way. And so your aspirations for your business need to be just as big and bold. And so it's just, being able to kind of pivot and do whatever it takes to grow and be successful regardless of the economy. I mean, you know this, you're running a services company, right? I mean, things do change.
Yes, they do. So, that's interesting. So there's a little bit of a perception that if you hit up a couple of investors and they say no, then, you've done your work. But I really like that you pointed out how many people that you actually talk to. So, we get a lot of people at Quick Left that want us to build something and, maybe that technology is going to be the thing that makes them successful. But a lot of people ask me, how much should they personally invest in their product? And I'm curious, when you went to all these investors, how far along were you and how did you get your product how far along did you get it? Did you personally invest in it to get something going? How'd you do that?
It's a lot of questions in there, but let me jump at them. I think they're all relevant, absolutely. So I did put money into my own company. And so I didn't take a salary for 5 years. So the whole time I ran that company, I took no salary. And then I wrote my own checks to grow the business. So this brings up another question. So if I could just take a quick tangent. Okay. So the one thing I learned, so one of my companies grew from 300% year over year. And I learned one thing from that. You cannot be great at everything inside of your business. Right? I know that's a laugh, but I thought I was the hottest shit for everything, and you realize that you're not. But if I look at my partnership with Rustin over there, so Rustin's my founder of Tap, and he's our chief product officer. And one of the things that you realize when you're growing a startup is the importance of partnership and having other people inside the business who kind of cover those blind spots. I pretend to be a product person on television, but I am not in real life. So, having a partner when you're building a business is critical because, I can raise money. I love it. I love selling. I love marketing. I love success. I love, I've got some of my folks here who are on that side of the house. But I love that side of things. But you also need someone who's equally as passionate about product and about engineering and about operations. And if you don't have that, I think that the market, the venture or the money market responds to you. So when I first went out and raised money, I had like a presentation. I thought, well, this is enough for you to know that I'm going to build a great product. And what we needed to show was actual traction. So we got there eventually, and that helped us to raise money.
Yeah, I think that's really important too because there is a stereotype that you can just show up with a PowerPoint, but there's a lot more to it. It does take 10 years to become an overnight success,
Amen.
So to speak. So tell us what brought you to Boulder. Was it the company, the lifestyle, all of the above?
Yeah, I guess can I amend that one comment about fundraising? So, I've raised a seed round, angel round, Series A, Series B, and Series C. And if you think about what's required for each of those different rounds, it's different. So in the beginning, it's about enthusiasm, team, story, right? We're going to disrupt this. We've all seen Silicon Valley show. We're going to disrupt this and we're going to bring this to the market. When you're raising your Series B, it's about showing that the Series A money and the seed money was well spent. And so you're trying to show, these are the metrics for market growth. Like you're trying to show like LTV and CAC. You're trying to show how fast you can acquire people. And so you're showing that you're about to take off. You just need new resources. And Series C is different. That's your bigger round. And the people that you're talking to and you're pitching, this being recorded somewhere? Okay. Let me amend what I was going to say then. You're actually focused on painting a picture about your next play. So whereas your Series B round is about getting the money to scale, your Series C round is saying, we've done this so successfully, now here's what our next act is going to be from a business standpoint. And so at each of those stages, you're actually telling a somewhat different story, and the people around the table change. They're interested in you, but they're very interested in the economics and the physics of your business. And so they're more banker-ish, the Series C and the later stage investors. And so knowing that what worked in your seed round and your Series A or B may not work in your Series C because the people are looking for different kinds of returns.
They want their return.
They want their return, yeah. I'm sorry, so why I moved from the Silicon Valley? Well, because I love it when it snows in May. That's why I came to Boulder. Is that
That's a great answer.
I'll be here all week. No, so I came for two reasons. The Valley is in this interesting spot. It's in a spot where it's been glamorized so much that you have crazy people and zombies everywhere. And that doesn't matter, but like when you're building teams, you want people who want to be part of your company, not because it's going to help them get a job at LinkedIn or help them get a job at Twitter, but because they truly feel like this is a place where they can connect with their peers and they can do something that matters. And so the Valley has a lot of this kind of like transactional culture that's coming. And when you're building great companies, you need great loyal people who work in those companies. So that's one. But two, I was in the process of accepting another offer, but what Rustin and the team had built at Tap was something that I couldn't look away from. Big market, product leadership, and just a ton of opportunity and upside.
I think that's really interesting what you said about the Valley. So having kind of been here at one of the beginnings of the startup scene here in Boulder, I've seen a lot of changes and a lot of growth, and it's been really great. But how do we prevent this community from kind of suffering some of those same things that you're seeing in the Valley?
Wow. One of the things I want to bring to the culture at TAP is bring the intensity of the Valley, right? But at the same time, the culture here is different. Like, the venture guys are different here, the people are different, the teams are different, the companies are different, and the community is different. I think it's more collegial, closer. I think it's less competitive. So I would just say stay Boulder, but add a little bit of stink from the Silicon Valley. Because what Boulder's known for is growing a lot of early stage companies. And that puts a cap on the wealth that gets created. That puts a cap on the number of VCs who want to be here. So Boulder has to sort of hit that hockey stick where it comes out and it can build multiple billion-dollar companies, right? But at the same time, it should stay authentic and it should stay humble, because that's what'll keep this from becoming kind of a crazy house.
So, what advice would you give companies that might be feeling like they're not getting traction here, they're not, VCs here aren't paying attention to them, the funding amounts aren't as much, and they're feeling that pull to go move to the Valley? What advice would you give them?
Oh, no, that's interesting. My advice would be if you can make a success in Boulder, then a success in Silicon Valley would be easier. Boulder's a tighter-knit community. I think people, I don't know what the crowd's kind of tolerance is for this, but when you're raising money in the Valley, a lot of these guys need unicorns. Like, they don't want you guys unicorns, decacorns. Okay, they don't want them. They need them, right? Because they will have bet big on different things in their portfolio. So they need the company that's going to give them 50 or 20x. Like, they need that, right? And so they're looking only for opportunities that kind of mirror that because of how the portfolio system works. Well, I think in Boulder, it's very different. The VCs want to get to know and build relationships with entrepreneurs. And so I think the probability of raising funds from a VC who will be, kind of stick with you longer and whatnot is higher here than it is in a place where everyone's looking for the decacorn or for the unicorn.
Yeah, I think that is a very good way to characterize Boulder. There's a little bit more of that long-term investment in people and companies here. I get that sense.
Right on.
So let's talk a little bit about your role. So you're currently Chief Revenue Officer, or that was previously?
I will always be Chief Revenue Officer, but I am CEO of TapInfluence.
That's excellent.
And I joined in March of this year.
So what do you consider, your primary duties? And the reason why I ask is, so I started Quick Left. I'm a software developer, and I sort of fell into the role as a CEO, and I didn't really know what that role was. And then I would run into people who would say, "Oh, I want to be a CEO one day," and I would be like, "No, you don't." So why don't you tell people a little bit about sort of, what do you consider yourself, what would you consider a success in terms of your role and your contribution to the company? What's your primary focus?
So primary focus, and as CEO, you think about this all the time, right? Because sometimes your primary focus is like you're a helicopter pilot, like you're getting in and you're solving problems and kind of swooping back out. So I'm really focused on three things right now. So one is figuring out what our next act is as a company. And so working with my management team and the rest of the company to figure out, okay, what do we do next? So I approach my job in a lot of ways right now as a product marketer and a market marketer. Like, who are we? What size do we want to be? Where are we going? How are we going to get there? What are the right channels? So sort of figuring those pieces out today. But secondarily, my job is I'm responsible for resources, right? So, the one beautiful thing about being a CEO is like you pay people's mortgages and, you're responsible for their happiness. And it's a big deal. I mean, it's a big deal. So I take our growth and that responsibility pretty seriously as my second job. And then my third is, it's culture. It's getting that right. It's getting, enough of Boulder and enough of Silicon Valley to come together and converge and build, with the hottest company in this town. So those are my three right now. That first one will change. I think in 6 months, I'll be focused on, product strategy and partnerships and things like that. But right now, it's really about figuring out how we get to market in the most optimal way.
So are you guys hoping to be one of those Boulder companies that has, the $1 billion valuation? Is that one of your goals?
Well, we don't hope.
Good. That's
we're
good.
just gonna make it happen. So
I like
how
that.
about
That's a great answer. Excellent. Let me do a quick time check.
You have about 7 minutes.
Okay.
If you wanna
Yeah, I'd love to save some time to ask some questions. Anybody have any questions so far? The audience? Yeah.
I'm just going to put it out there. Being a female CEO in the tech world is difficult. How do you keep on going without getting caught up in certain things? I don't know the best way to put that.
So, sure. So the question was, how do you deal with being a female CEO in the tech industry, which is male dominated, without getting frazzled?
That's interesting. I mean, no one's ever come into my room in a bathrobe. So, I don't know if you guys, Ellen Powell. I'm done. All right, so this may not be popular. So I'm also an African American woman, and I'm from Texas. So, right? At the end of the day, I believe that. So I'm of two minds about it, right? So one is I put on my, I'm the first person to climb the Dawn Wall in Everest. In Yosemite, and I think about that, and I think it doesn't matter if I get caught up in the struggle and worrying about, how are they perceiving me, then I'll spend a lot of energy on what I know is going to be a first ascent. Does that make sense? Like, it's just a first ascent. And then the other part is there are some advantages of that. I believe, and Rustin's heard me talk about this, I believe that millennials respond well to aspects of leadership that are feminine. Collaboration, openness, transparency, empowerment. Like, I have a huge ego, but I'm much, much more interested in seeing Jules rock it out at TAP or seeing Marina hit her stride. Like, I'm much more interested in that than filling my own ego. And not that that's male per se, but I think as a woman leader, you have different capabilities and advantages that actually in some ways make you more attractive to venture guys into the community because you attract and retain talent in a way that's different. So I guess to answer your question, yes, I'm Black, I'm Texan, and I'm a woman. I'm making a first ascent, and that's just what it is, right? And then secondly, I believe that women have an advantage as leaders in this moment because millennials don't want to be told what to do. They want to be inspired. They don't want to be bossed. They don't want to be told, if you don't. So I think there's a moment where we have a chance to show up as a new class of leaders, and I'm excited about that, actually.
That's awesome. Clap for that answer.
So you've run both product companies and service companies.
Yep.
Can you speak to the difference in scaling those and growing those and kind of just the
Yeah.
Did everyone hear that? So in running both a product and a services company, speak to the differences of scaling that.
Yeah, and I'd be interested in talking about that a little bit with you,
It's
young
my
lady.
favorite question.
Right? Because they're the same thing. So when I was running my services company, first year revenues were about, I think, $40K. Second year were about $250,000. And then after that, we were like $1.5 million, just climbing. And the difference was we productized our services. And similar to Quick Left, we fired a lot of people. So a lot of clients did not come to the front door because they didn't meet a certain set of criteria, which is how product companies approach stuff. So the only way that we were able to scale as a services company was to productize our offerings and to make that much more consistent from a delivery as well as from a sales and business development perspective. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really hard for people to conceptualize a service that's pretty much custom, so we can build whatever you need. How does that relate to me as a consumer or a business consumer? So productization is a really great strategy, and it helps people position themselves in the seat of needing that service. It just clarifies.
Right on.
Any other questions?
Excellent.
Bryce.
So I think a big problem for very early stage companies is this the problem of an identity crisis. Can you speak to that? Have you seen that? Because many times you can get pulled in so many different directions.
Oh yeah.
Have you dealt with that before?
So how do you stay focused when you're starting is the question.
Yeah. Sometimes those conversations are good that get you off, right? Where you basically say, we're going to do this, and someone goes, that will never work, right? So I kind of came up with a rule that if I hear something once, it's that person's problem. If I hear something twice, I just talk to two of the same type of people, and it's their problem. But if I heard something 5 times, then it was an input for me to rethink the strategy. But But if you are passionate about and obsessed with a certain type of product or market or problem, I believe you should stay obsessed about it. Because most people believe that LinkedIn people would never put their resume online, but Reed was obsessed with it. People thought that, like, if you look at how much Uber spends in lawsuits, you would think that they were a poorly managed company, but they are obsessed, right? So my advice is, if you want to be a startup person and be an entrepreneur, and it's about the struggle and the fight and the move forward, take that input and use that input to kind of massage your strategy. But if you're obsessed with something, then you should continue to be obsessed with that and only do that the way that you want to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that was definitely something that we did early on too. You know, we could have become a full service agency, and there was a lot of temptation to try to get into new business lines and other sources of revenue. And staying focused is what allowed us to be successful really quickly.
Right on.
I see Rob over there.
That's about all the time we have. Please give
Thank you. It's good to meet you.